A biker unleashed his dog on an elderly black woman without a second thought, completely unaware that the woman's daughter was a tech entrepreneur with the power to bring justice. What happened next left everyone stunned. Margaret, a 72-year-old woman with a slight frame and kind, weathered features, walked cautiously along a quiet street in Atlanta. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the pavement. Margaret enjoyed her daily walks. They were a cherished routine, offering her a sense of peace and reflection. However, as she rounded a corner, she spotted a group of bikers gathered outside a gas station. The men were laughing loudly, their leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias. Several large dogs surrounded them, their heavy chains clinking ominously as the animals shifted and growled. Margaret's heart quickened. She had been afraid of dogs for as long as she could remember. She considered crossing the street, but the traffic was heavy, and the nearest crosswalk was far away. Gathering her courage, she decided to continue forward, hoping they would move aside and let her pass. As she approached, Margaret smiled politely, her voice steady but soft as she said, "Excuse me, could you please hold your dog so I can pass?" One of the bikers, a tall, muscular man with a shaved head and an intimidating smirk, glanced at her. His name was Cole, and he was known among his group for his cruel sense of humor. He exchanged a glance with his companions, who chuckled, and then looked back at Margaret. "You scared of dogs, lady?" he asked mockingly. Margaret nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Just hold them, please. I don't want any trouble." Cole shrugged and tugged on the chain of his Doberman, a massive animal with rippling muscles and sharp teeth. "Relax. He won't hurt you if you don't bother him." The other bikers laughed, as if this were the funniest thing they'd heard all day. Margaret, trying to maintain her composure, nodded and began to walk past. But as she did, Cole leaned down and whispered something to the dog. The Doberman's ears perked up, and it began barking ferociously, lunging forward and straining against the chain. Margaret froze in terror, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She turned to Cole, her voice trembling as she said, "Please, stop this. You're doing it on purpose." Cole grinned, his expression full of mock innocence. "Doing what? He's just excited to see you," he said with a chuckle. The other bikers joined in, their laughter echoing through the quiet street. Before Margaret could react, Cole slackened his grip on the leash. The dog lunged forward, snapping and snarling, its teeth inches from Margaret's face. She stumbled backward, tripping over the curb and falling hard onto the pavement. Pain shot through her hip and wrist, but the terror of the dog overshadowed everything else. Cole laughed again, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Then, with a sharp jerk, the dog broke free from the chain entirely. It lunged at Margaret, its powerful jaws clamping down on her arm. She screamed, the sound piercing and raw, as the dog shook its head violently, tearing into her flesh. Blood spattered onto the pavement as bystanders began to gather, their expressions a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Get it off her!" someone shouted, but Cole seemed frozen, his smug expression replaced with uncertainty. Another biker finally grabbed the dog's chain and yanked it back, prying its jaws off Margaret's arm. She collapsed onto the ground, clutching her bleeding arm and trembling uncontrollably. Her face was pale, her breath shallow as the crowd closed in. Cole, now visibly nervous, raised his hands defensively. "She's fine," he said loudly, his voice laced with false bravado. "She probably provoked him." But the murmurs among the crowd told a different story. People were pulling out their phones, recording the aftermath, as Margaret lay on the ground, her face contorted in pain. An ambulance arrived within minutes, the paramedics quickly assessing Margaret's injuries and stabilizing her arm. As they loaded her onto a stretcher, Margaret's voice was weak but clear as she told the paramedics, "He did it on purpose. He wanted the dog to attack me." One bystander stepped forward to give a statement to the police who had arrived on the scene. "She didn't do anything to provoke them," the man said. "They were messing with her, trying to scare her, and then the dog attacked." The officer nodded grimly, taking notes as another officer approached Cole and his group. Cole, seeing the mounting tension, muttered something to his friends and began to walk away, his dog's chain in hand. "Hey, stop right there," the officer called, but Cole ignored him, quickening his pace. Meanwhile, At the hospital, Margaret lay in the emergency room, her arm heavily bandaged and her body weak from blood loss. She stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face as the weight of what had happened settled over her. A nurse gently placed her phone on the bedside table, and Margaret, with trembling hands, reached for it. She dialed her daughter's number. Maya Fields, a 34-year-old tech entrepreneur based in San Francisco, answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom. How?" Maya's cheerful voice cut off as she heard Margaret's shaky breathing. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Maya," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "I was attacked. A man set his dog on me." Maya's heart stopped, her grip tightening on her phone. "What? Where are you? Are you okay?" Margaret explained everything between sobs, her voice trembling as she recounted the cruelty of the bikers and the terrifying attack. Maya listened in stunned silence, her mind racing with a mix of rage and anguish. "I'm coming," she said firmly. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Just hang on, Mom." Within hours, Maya was at her mother's side. She stepped into the hospital room, her usually composed demeanor replaced with visible distress. Margaret's arm was in a sling, her face pale and lined with pain. Maya's heart broke at the sight of her mother in such a vulnerable state. "Mom," she said softly, sitting beside her and taking her hand. Margaret looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with tears. "They laughed at me," she whispered. "They thought it was funny to see me scared." Maya's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. "They'll pay for this," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I promise you, Mom, they won't get away with it." Maya wasted no time. She contacted Detective Laura Harris, a high-ranking officer in Atlanta, who was known for her no-nonsense approach to justice. Maya explained the situation, providing details and emphasizing the need for swift action. Harris listened carefully, her voice calm but firm, as she assured Maya that the case would be a priority. Harris and her team began their investigation immediately. They interviewed witnesses, many of whom had recorded the attack on their phones. The videos clearly showed Cole provoking the dog and then standing by as it attacked Margaret. Surveillance footage from the gas station confirmed the sequence of events, capturing Cole's smirk and the way he whispered to the dog before it lunged at Margaret. Harris also uncovered Cole's extensive criminal record. He had a history of violence, including assault charges that had been dropped due to lack of evidence. His biker gang had long been suspected of illegal activities, from drug distribution to intimidation tactics. Harris knew this was her chance to hold them accountable. Armed with overwhelming evidence, Harris obtained a warrant for Cole's arrest. She and her team found him at a bar on the outskirts of the city, laughing and drinking with his gang. When the officers entered, Cole's cocky demeanor faltered. He tried to brush them off, but Harris wasn't having it. "You're under arrest for assault and reckless endangerment," she said, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. The arrest was only the beginning. As the case progressed, the prosecutor built an airtight argument against Cole, using the video evidence and witness statements to highlight the deliberate nature of his actions. In court, Margaret's testimony was powerful. Though her voice was soft, her words carried the weight of her pain and fear. "He knew I was scared," she said, "and he used that fear against me. He thought it was funny." The jury deliberated for less than a day before finding Cole guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 5. His gang members faced additional charges for unrelated crimes, dismantling their operation and bringing a sense of relief to the community. For Margaret, the journey to healing was long and arduous. Physical therapy helped her regain strength in her arm, but the emotional scars were harder to mend. She often woke in the middle of the night, haunted by the memory of the dog's teeth sinking into her flesh. Maya was her rock, supporting her every step of the way. She hired the best doctors and therapists, ensuring her mother received top-notch care. But Maya didn't stop there. She used her platform as a successful entrepreneur to advocate for stronger laws against animal-related violence and harsher penalties for those who weaponized their pets. Through Maya's efforts, new legislation was introduced in Georgia, mandating stricter regulations for dangerous dogs and holding owners accountable for their actions. Margaret's story became a rallying cry for change, inspiring countless others to stand up against cruelty and injustice. Though the attack had left lasting scars, Margaret found solace in the love and support of her daughter and community. Together, they turned a moment of unimaginable pain into a movement for empathy and accountability.